So our last activity for the day, and I hope you will all stay around for this, and this is a panel discussion. And Shawn, you're going to lead the charge here. I'm going to ask Manny to come up also. Kevin. Bob. We will come up here. We're going to bring a table up here, sit at a panel behind it, and we're going to discuss what solutions from history. And I think that one of the most important aspects of history is you can look at history and just look at it and say that was a nice thing of the past. Or you can say, wow, there's really something we can learn from history to make the future better. And I think if we could just turn some chairs around here up in the front and we'll do it right in the center. Manny, can you help us out with the chairs? Bob, just bring your chair right here. Bob Pruter?
Oh, I thought you were talking about Bob Barney.
Bob Barney, no, if Bob Barney were here, instead of being stuck in traffic in Miami.
I saw him.
Yeah. That's David.
That's
He's
David.
got it.
And I think we've got enough now as Kevin's up here, Shawn's up here, Jim, Stump. There's two issues that we need. The remote control is not for that. We can't seem to change the aspect ratio to 4:3, and the hum's coming out of that one. So we can't figure this out. This is Jim Stump, who is absolutely one of the great directors and producers of films. Been doing it for years, and has done a lot of incredible documentaries and stuff, and has been our Hall of Fame video guy for a century.
Apparently not so high at PAs.
Not very good at PAs, but it could be the AV man too. And that's that. So I guess there's one other guy down there, and that's me. And we'll just talk loud, right? Do we need the microphone or anything? I don't think so. Right? Everybody's a coach. We can talk loud enough. So Tom, if you can get up a little bit closer, we're going to try and pick this up from there without loudspeakers, because I don't think we can string this over there. So, Shawn, again, the idea of this is, what are these guys from history? What can we learn from history to improve the future? And that's kind of with this issue of diversity and African American challenge and Native American challenge into aquatic sports. What are the solutions? What are the issues? And Manny is currently, if you'd introduce everybody, everybody knows everybody, but we haven't introduced Manny yet.
To introduce Manny real quick, Manny works as a diversity membership specialist for USA Swimming out of Colorado Springs at the Olympic Training Center. Prior to that, he had a career in both the NBA and working with their marketing and outreach stuff. So he'll be joining us today. My first question goes a little bit into just your research. I was wondering what compelled each of you to begin research in this area, and what motivates you to continue with it today? And I guess, Mandy, that would be work, so.
Left to right?
Left to right, yes.
Okay, I'm left. I've always been a lefty. And what compelled me to get into this particular research? Well, this really has to do with my own personal interest in two areas of research. One is I've always been interested in African American music, and that was my first interest in research. And I've written two books on African American music called Chicago Soul and one doo-wop, Chicago Scene, which covers African American music from the 50s through the 70s. And in fact, one of the people that I interviewed for the DuSable swimming presentation was originally done because he was a member of a doo-wop group, and that came out of DuSable. And I said, did you ever have Mackie as your physical education instructor? And he said yes. So I was bringing two areas of interest in one interview. And then I got in, I later moved into sport history and joined NASH. I've done, and my focus has always been on high school history. And going through, doing my research, I started coming across this story of DuSable that was reported in the newspapers. I said, this is interesting. Looks like a interesting topic, especially since there was this undercurrent, disquiet, I would say, about African Americans and their not participating in swimming. And I said, well, here's an example that kind of shows, you know, that African Americans do swim and are interested in swimming. And even though I'm doing a book on the history of high school sports, it only ends in 1930. But so DuSable's kind of outside that book, but it's it has a lot of resonances earlier, as Kevin Dawson pointed out, and later. I guess that's what it is my interest in various aspects of African American history and high school sport history.
For me, well, it seems kind of obvious that I want to, being part of the International Swimming Hall of Fame, discover the history of swimming. And our mission is to inspire everyone to swim, and there's certainly a lack of participation by African American and other minority athletes. There's certainly that stereotype that goes around that blacks can't swim, and noticing at every swim meet there's very few African Americans at any meet that I've ever been to in my entire life, except my very first one. But after I got out of college, I went down and became the coach of the Virgin Islands in St. Croix, the United States Virgin Islands. And when I went down there, the team was entirely made of expats, people that worked for Hess and Amarada or Alcoa, were the two big factories there, so it was an entirely white team. But we started a Learn to Swim program, and now it's virtually an entire black team, or it was when we left. Tim Duncan and his sister joined the team after I left, but what we had established, and that was because we had our senior swimmers every weekend devoting free swim lessons to the community at different hotel pools around the area. And of course, we discovered some great talented swimmers. So you put that in the back pocket, came back up here, and when I ran United States Water Polo, I became very close to a small school, St. Peter's in Newark, New Jersey, where there was a young swimmer that was also a water polo player, and we kind of adopted that program. And we gave the school scholarships where we funded athletes to go to water polo camps out in California. One of those kids was Cullen Jones as a young kid. So years later, when Cullen Jones became Cullen Jones, it was very interesting to call him, hey, where's this kid play water polo back for you? With the coach that I knew, Sharif Upton, at the school. They said, that's the guy. Well, we got to get him down here to the Hall of Fame. But I'd already started doing a little bit of research on our own. So when you go and you see, it doesn't take much when you see your perception of swimming. And growing up in the 50s, we just took it for granted that white people swam and black people weren't competitive. But then you go and you find things in the old archives up here that tell you, and the biggest revelation was finding the Thief and O book, written in 1697, and I'm also a big Benjamin Franklin person. Coming from Philadelphia, I have probably 300 Benjamin Franklin books at my house. And in Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, he read the book written by Thief and O in 1696, and that's what he used to teach himself how to swim when he was a boy. And then you read in the introduction of that book that Thibodeau says that the ancient Greeks and Romans were all practitioners of the sport of swimming, but in modern times it's the Negroes and the Indians who excel all others in the arts of swimming and diving, which Kevin read. So now you say, well, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture. So we have an awful lot of archives in here, and then spending a lot of nights looking up different activities and doing Google searches, whether it be Negro, slave, swim, and in these combination of words, you come across some amazing stories. And that really led to me, and then you look here, except for Anthony Nesty, there's no African Americans in the Swimming Hall of Fame. So if we're going to tell that story and inspire, it has to be something beyond just Olympic sports, because for 400 years before the Olympics, there was a group of people that dominated all activities related to the water. And then you read that the great swimmers of the world were the Aboriginal people of Africa, the Americas, and the Polynesian Islands, and you connect that with Moby Dick, and you see Queequeg, Daggoo, and
What's his name?
the American Indian guy's name, I can't remember right now. But that was very symbolic, that these were the great swimmers of the world. So there's been a story here that has not been told. We have it in our archives, just nobody's connected the dots. And to me, that's very exciting. And it was kind of like a major detective story. And it's been incredibly pleasurable, and I find something out every day that I never knew before. Like we were just talking about that painting that we have up there of the miracle of the cross of the St. Leandro Bridge. And you know, why is there one black guy in it in Venice in 1500? Then you find out, well, they had a black servant there that was a swim instructor. And then you find out that why would they have a black swim instructor? Because at that time period, everyone acknowledged that the Africans were the greatest swimmers in the world. So that's why Africans were brought to Europe to teach swimming to the Europeans. But this doesn't connect. The perception that we have of swimming just doesn't connect with the reality of history, which has been whitewashed, for want of a better word, like in the surfing history. So it's been an amazing intellectual experience to pursue. And that's really been a lot of fun, and maybe the most fun of anything that I've done here at the Hall of Fame.
For me, it was a combination of personal and I thought I could project, and kind of scholarly interests. And growing up surfing and swimming and underwater diving, and kind of thinking about it, I think one of the two kind of things got me interested in swimming kind of historically, which were events from my life. And one of them was this event that I shared with Cheryl earlier, my first experience with racism. And so, you know, I learned to swim when I was about 2 months old. I started going to swim lessons, and so I was a pretty strong swimmer. And I went to Long Beach, California, which has no waves. And I'd been surfing by this time. I was maybe 7 years old. And I was playing down at the beach. And there was a kid who was a couple years older than me, maybe 9 or 10. And I had been playing with this other kid, and you know, I said, let's go swimming. And this kid, who was a little bit older, had been a jerk. And he told me, well, colored people can't swim. And I didn't know what, I mean, this was like 1979, and I guess colored by that time was an anachronism, and I didn't even know what the term was, but I knew he was telling me, and I should explain, I mean, I'm a black, Choctaw, and Irish, and so I didn't know what a colored person was, but I knew he meant that I couldn't swim. So I challenged him to a race, and I beat him. But I mean, kind of in his defense, I'm sure I didn't look like I could swim because I was a rail thin kid in tie-dye Speedo with a huge afro. And so, you know, I put off a pretty good bow wave, but I could still swim. And so this kind of drew my attention to this idea at an early age that, I mean, later on I learned this myth that black people, the stereotype that black people couldn't swim. And then at the same time, my mom, well, I used to go on these family trips, and my mom loved to go on Dawson tours, and we would go on these ships in California, and then we had family in Philadelphia and New York, and we'd go on these ship tours. And I remember hearing that the Dawsons would oftentimes say that sailors couldn't swim, you know, that they would want to just fall overboard and drown peacefully, because this was kind of a futile struggle with nature, that they'd flounder around as they could swim for hours before being eaten by a shark, and so they just wanted to die quickly. And I just thought, well, this is kind of a ridiculous reason for not learning how to swim. And so then when I got into college, I started seeing these accounts of slaves and Africans swimming and diving, and it just blew me away. And so I just kept taking notes on it for years until I had amassed enough stuff to actually do something with it, to document Africans and slaves swimming. And all the time, I mean, I knew as I was reading these accounts no historians were writing about this, and so I thought, there's something here. I didn't know what, and so it was, like I said, years. That project was kind of years in the making. So that's what drew me in.
Forgive me, Shawn, but repeat the question.
What compelled you to begin research in this area, and what motivates you to continue it today? I guess that would be work for you, Manny.
What we're talking about is actually my job. As a diversity membership specialist, I travel around the country and work with different municipalities, government officials. Hello? Okay, I'm going to.
It's on now.
Government officials and different.
Are you switching it off?
No, I'll just use my
If you hold it down low. There's the button. There you go. There's the button.
government officials.
Just hold it.
Let me use the voice I use when I'm on deck. I work with different government officials on different programs. In 2008 and 2010, USA Swimming commissioned a national research study that examined the constraints impacting minority participation. A lot of people don't know, but I actually was the person in charge of that study. In 2008, it was a quantitative research study, and in 2010, we did a mixed methods. Basically, for those that don't understand the terms, 2008, it was about raw numbers. We got the numbers, but we needed to know why. And so in 2010, I worked with the University of Memphis again to figure out why, examining the constraints that impact minority participation, from hair issues to body issues to transportation and access. We examined the myths that have been perpetrated throughout centuries. So I was the gentleman behind that, and so all of that has led me to, actually this is like my third or fourth time here, to work with Bruce on different initiatives to get the education that's in the Hall of Fame out. So, yeah, hopefully everyone heard me.
Thank you, gentlemen. What are the lessons learned from your research that we can use to help impact the future?
The lessons learned from my research is
Don't play around with
something
megaphones.
spectacular like that. Hello? Oh, I'm connected. The lessons I think I've learned is that there are stories out there, there are narratives out there, there's evidence out there that still needs to be found, and with this evidence, with these stories, what we've learned, this is what history does. History gives us, a better understanding of our world and where we came from, and we can go forward in the future with arguments, with explanations, just like we've heard this the last few days. Arguments about how people of color in Polynesia, the Americas, Africa, we're great swimmers. I've learned a lot this the last few days. I thought I knew a lot, but boy, when I come here, there's just so many rich stories and rich information that I'm going to go back far more educated, and with this education, we spread it around, we disseminate it, and the International Swimming Hall of Fame is probably the greatest disseminator of information, and I applaud their efforts in that part.
I think the thing that I've learned from this, in addition to being the president of the Swimming Hall of Fame, for the last 6 years, I think I've served as the president of the Swims Foundation. And what the Swims Foundation does here, it really I've come in late with this, but I was here actually when it started. and have been a board member for a long time. The Swims Foundation started Swim Central, which is to address the drowning issue locally. We developed with Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and other people when she was on the school board to start a funded Learn to Swim program that addresses water safety and water education for preschool and elementary school kids, which has had a dramatic impact on the drowning here. But what we find out when these kids that have all taken this 10-lesson class, which has become a national model, by the way, while it prevents drowning, it doesn't inspire kids to swim. So when we take this to the high schools, so there's 2 predominantly black high schools here in Broward County that have had almost 100% of the kids go through this program. Neither of these high schools can field swim teams. And when asked if the kids can swim, maybe it'll be 60% or 40% say they can, admit they can, but then when the PE teacher gets them out to the pool, it's more like 85–90% can't swim across deep water safely. So that is not the answer in and of itself. And I believe that as I look back, what we can learn about the African American experience now, as in my talk this afternoon, was that let's look back and see how we changed a non-white swimming population to a predominantly swimming population that gave my parents and grandparents the opportunity to get in the water, which has been handed down from generation to generation to my kids as well. And it's something that the love of swimming and getting acclimated early into the water is something that really comes from the family, and you can't force it on people. It has to want to do it, but it has to start somewhere. So the stories that he tells, the stories of the inspirational stories, in part of my research, I went out to the African American Research Library, which we have a very big one here in Broward County, and they've got a room half the size of this filled with children's books. The only book they had on swimming had to do with Janet Evans. So is that going to be inspiring? But if you look at all the other sports, there's tons of books and stories. So the stories of people like Milt Campbell, who will get our Gold Medallion Award, or the story of the DeSable High School, or the story of Charles Jackson French, or Mahmoud Yarrow, or some of these other swimmers, or the stories of African experience in swimming. These are things that need to be a part of education so that we can change the dialogue in the homes of black families to not don't swim, but let's swim. And how do we do that? It's a very complex issue. And I think we're going to start with this, but it's not one thing. It might not be 2 things, might not be 3 things. It is a whole system, and it took 100 years to change that dynamic, to change white people to swimmers, black people to non-swimmers. And it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to do it right away, but we've got to get started, and we've got to do a number of different things to do it. And stories and anecdotes and education and books and education at the schools and the stress for swim instruction, they're all part of the equation. But it might also be movies and all that stuff. It's depictions of people in movies. The white population had Johnny Weissmuller and Buster Crabbe and Annette Kellerman starting in 1914 at this age. Where's the black swimmer or hero in the movies? So it's a lot of different things. So filmmakers there, sure. So what I learned is we've got a lot to learn.
May I just add something? Well, we had a recent film of black achievement in swimming, and it's called Pride from 2006, and that's I guess a start or something.
It also was fairly much a failure at the box office.
Well,
it's a tragedy.
it was kind of.
Well, but you know, there are a lot of corny movies there. It's just that, in my opinion, they marketed the whole thing all wrong. They did not put it in the historical context it is, so people didn't understand what the significance of that story was. So it's like The $1 Million Mermaid, the story of Annette Kellerman. It's not a great movie, but it is a great movie.
Right.
Can I just comment on Pride?
Yeah.
When Pride came out, I actually was in business development. I'm in club development now, so I'm very familiar with the strategy that Lionsgate used. When they decided to market their film, they did it to swimmers.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that, I'm not saying swimmers caused it to fail. What caused the movie to fail is the fact that they didn't market it to a whole audience. they thought by marketing to swimmers, everyone would come out. But the movie star Terrence Howard and Bernie Mac, thank you. And what they should have done was promote those two actors. You had one was nominated for an Oscar, if I remember correctly. And that would have, by using that strategy, the film may have made more money. But it is kind of corny, but for kids that haven't experienced swimming, to understand swimming, you got to respect the history and know about the history, and probably would have been an introduction to people and kids if Lionsgate had marketed correctly. That's just a little behind the scenes.
Very good, Mark.
I'm trying to turn this off. Well, I teach a lot of my courses and a lot of my research deal with slavery throughout the Americas and how slaves brought African skills to the Americas. So I deal a lot with Africa and then the New World. And so for me, I mean, kind of dealing with, also with swimming, but for my topic, slaves swimming, one of the real challenges is that I found, and that oftentimes I do these what are called teacher workshops, where we go to K through, well, primarily to teachers that teach from 5th through 12th grade, and do these workshops and get them to, I talk about the slave trade and slavery, so that I can provide them with lesson plans. And so a challenge I have kind of in that regards, and then also dealing with swimming, is that it's hard to teach slavery. I mean, it makes white and black people uncomfortable. I mean, a lot of the teachers tell me that, the white students get uneasy because they feel that black students are going to resent them, and black students feel that this is a story of subjugation. And yes, slavery, I mean, was a violent institution. Violence and the threat of violence were the foundations of slavery. Without it, it couldn't have existed, right? You can't peacefully enslave people. But what I try and do, and I hope I did this in the talk, is kind of not sidestep the issue of the brutality. I mean, you have to keep it within its context that this is slavery and that slaves are forced to do this, but to recognize how, what a lot of scholars would call slaves' agency, or their ability to shape their daily lives, their work lives, their recreational lives. And so that's what I try and teach either students, or sometimes I've given talks to groups that are promoting swimming in African American and Hispanic communities, and to show them that, especially with African Americans, that this isn't something you should be ashamed of. Slavery isn't something you should be ashamed of. Yeah, your ancestors were brought here through this horrific process, but one of the things to look at, I mean, when you talk about why was the New World colonized, it was colonized to make money for Europe. And one thing that people don't understand, oftentimes fail to understand, is that most of the people that came from the Old World to the New, from 1500 through the early 1800s, were Africans. I mean, 80% of the people, 12 million slaves compared to 2 million white people. And so slave culture dominated white culture. I mean, most white people adopted slave cultural practices. And so, these are the types of things that I talk about with students, and that kind of help get them to drop their guard down, so that both white and black students become open to these ideas of talking about swimming, slave swimming, or just other historical processes.
What have I learned from all the last 2 days and the data I've collected over the years since being at swimming and being involved in swimming? Something Bruce said earlier today when it came to the pulls from the switch from African Americans knowing how to swim and came over, and then whites picking it up, and now African Americans don't. I think one of the keys is role models. You show different slides of actors and actresses promoting swimming as healthy, making it popular, and making it fun. And what I think for the African American, Hispanic, and Native American communities, that's what they need. They need to see someone like them that makes them want to jump in a pool, and, well, don't jump in, but makes them want to learn how to swim. So that's one thing I've learned.
Thank you, gentlemen, again. I think we've all agreed that there's many variables that are out there in tackling some disparities within drowning. What's one thing you think we can do to increase awareness, address current drowning disparities, and improve aquatic participation?
How much time do we have?
You only get one thing. So we've agreed there's a lot of variables, but if you had to choose one.
One thing, well, first I think it would help if we started in our schools. You know, most schools, high schools nowadays have swimming pools, and they have physical education courses, and I think, I remember when I went to high school, everybody in the freshman class had to learn how to swim. It was really emphasized, and they're not doing that anymore. And I think we have to return to that.
I'd agree with that. The only thing that I would suggest is that we don't start at the high schools, that we work our pools, particularly here in Broward County, get them at the earlier ages. Elementary schools would be the place to learn to swim. Younger, after the age of 7, it gets more difficult. So we would do it that way. And I think when you go back to the schools, there is no literature, children's books, stressing, whether it be creating role model characters of fiction or role model characters of truth, reality, like the Milt Campbell story or some of the other ones that are really incredible, I think are another key. We've got to get those books, they've got to be taken home, parents have to read them to learn about swimming and all the benefits of that stuff. And when you go into a library and you see 500 books on Jackie Robinson or baseball or football or Michael Vick or you name it, where is the swimmer that you can take the book home and read about? And that education, again, education. So whether it be education about the dialogue of swimming or actual swimming itself.
I think I agree with what both Bruce and Bob said, although I think I would even go earlier. I mean, from personal experiences, again, I learned myself and then some of my cousins who are roughly the same age as myself, we learned to swim at about 2 months of age, 2 to 3 months. And so we were never really afraid of water. And then some of my other cousins learned to swim at 6 or 7. And I think that's probably too late then, because I think kids have already just kind of developed this fear of water. So I think the younger, the better. I mean, I don't know how you would convey that to parents. I think that would be the real challenge is conveying this to parents. Maybe, I know in the hospitals when kids are born, they give parents these packets of information, and so perhaps have stuff on swimming, and possibly have, more government-funded swim programs or, subsidized swim programs for kids.
I agree with everything these gentlemen said, but the only thing I would add is the days of going, and this is just my personal belief, and keep in mind that my background is marketing and doing business relations in other professional sports as well as swimming. The days of going to a school board and asking for a program to be included, I personally believe those days are done with because the money is so tight. What you need to do is go directly to reach out to the kids and the parents. We live in an electronic age. What we need to do for swimming to get these kids, African American, Hispanic, Native Americans involved in swimming is somehow use electronic mediums, Facebook, Twitter, to promote swimming.
a lot of these kids have the latest Jordans, but they also have an iPad. There has to be a way we can create a swimming app that you download and you basically answer questions about if you know how to swim, do you want to learn how to swim? You click a button and it directs you to your local swim provider. Again, what these gentlemen said are great. I think that should be done, but we need to stop thinking of ways that we've done in the past that hasn't worked, because what we've done so far has gotten us to where we're at now, where African Americans, Hispanic, and Native Americans, not enough of them are learning how to swim. So we need to reach out to these kids and parents through electronic means, if that makes sense to everyone.
Do you think that the research you presented helps dismiss current stereotypes? If so, how? And how important is that moving forward?
Answer the first part of the question, yes. Second part of the question is a little bit more difficult. How? Part of the problem is that I can do this research at the International Swimming Hall of Fame, and the word gets out to people here. There is no mass media coverage of this conference. Maybe a little news. I think there was a newspaper story, wasn't there?
I hear it was a big one today.
Big one. I gotta go get the paper.
It's picture.
Okay. Well, you know, that's good, but I think gentleman on the end said, you know, the communication is limited. To get the word out, to get these stories out, it's hard to go beyond conferences into the whole mass public, and I don't have a solution for that, but I think that's a problem.
Yes? And I think, thinking back on my one choice, again, I want to stress that facilities are a key. The proper type of facility that makes it attractive for people to want to come to swim. The role models and the books and the education are just another factor of it. But to me, looking back historically, it's those swimming pools that made it swimming very attractive. There were a lot of things that did it, but you can tell it's fun, but if you get there, you tell them swimming's fun and you have them come to this pool, what are they going to do? It's got to be fun. So redesigning and rethinking the way facilities are in municipal pools, creating facilities that don't lose $1 million a year, but at least break even, is a real key, and I think that's a real key for swimming as well. So I would go back and look at the architects. I know I've had a huge fight with people selling them on this idea here at the zone facility. And there's a lot of resistance within the architectural community because this is the way it's been done. We've got to get some forward thinkers going to say, maybe there's another type of pool that would attract more usage, more programs, more people, more diversity, and be reflective of something that would be attractive to the entire aquatic community, instead of what we've been doing since the model of the post-integration period, where they changed, and that's the same type of pool design that every pool in the United States is built virtually. So that would, maybe it's the attack with the architects and pool designers.
I would hope that my research has helped dispel some of these myths. And as far as moving forward, what I think and what I'm doing trying to do at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, is actually start a swim program there for kids. And Bruce has helped me kind of line up support for this. We're in kind of a pretty bad budget situation, and so we're trying to navigate that right now. But the reason why I think universities actually work is because you have the infrastructure there. I mean, you have the pools. At least during the summer, universities tend to have sports camps for kids. I mean, I did it a lot when I was a kid, basketball, soccer, football, tennis, whatever. And you did these camps with the athletes. I mean, the athletes came out and taught you, you know, different techniques and things like that. And so what we're kind of in the beginning stages of doing at UNLV is trying to get the swimming and dive, the members of the swimming and diving programs, you know, to help run maybe 1-week courses or courses throughout the year. I know some universities actually do this throughout the year. I taught at Fairfield University in Connecticut, and their swim and dive, the members of their swim and dive team would offer every Saturday, I think it was, they would offer classes for kids, community kids. And so we're trying to implement something like that, but they could target kids who can't swim and teach them you know, these skills. And again, when you have the infrastructure there, so it's not like you're having to, and I think Bruce's idea is great. But I mean, if you have to go with what you have, you know, the infrastructure is there, you have these competent swimmers, and so that's what we're trying to do.
I didn't present, so I'll talk about how we get the information out.
That's
Yeah.
the next question.
Oh.
Last question before we open it up. What future aquatic projects and research will you be engaging in, and what can we do to assist you and or promote your efforts?
Go ahead.
You can go first.
Future research studies, USA Swimming and the University of Memphis. We're going to partner again next year to do instead of a national study, we're going to be looking at, for instance, the hair issue more specifically with African American women and Hispanic women. We're going to look at that. And in the future, we're going to continue reaching out to government, municipalities on programming in different cities through our Make a Splash initiative and other initiatives that we have in the community.
Future projects or a future project is, and I'm working on it right now, actually two kind of simultaneously, or I should say one right now and then one shortcoming is looking at kind of the first presentation I did today, swimming, surfing, and underwater diving in Africa. I published kind of a preliminary article on it, and so I'm looking at doing a larger article on that. And then also working on, kind of as a second book, looking at tracing the history of Black people from Africa to at least into the 20th century, well into the 20th century, and looking at so kind of the rise and fall of swimming among people of African descent.
On this subject, what we're doing now is we have a number of books that we're working with a local publisher. Again, these are targeted as children's books, first, second grade. And one of the most exciting ones that we're doing is for the local Haitian book, what do you call them? Book company? Publisher. Thank you very much. It's a pretty simple word, too. So we're working with a publisher, and we found an artist here who's done some incredible work in Haitian art, and it's a very simple book. And our belief is, and in talking to the swimming federations in Africa, everyone has the same problem. Whether it's Africa or America, there's really not a great perception of swimming, and they really want to swim. So we have this book that really has 10 fantastic illustrations of learning to swim, I want to swim, swimming is fun, how to be safe in the water, very simple phrases. But to translate this into 5 languages, one Creole, English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. And with that, we figure we have the entire Caribbean basin, the Americas, and the west coast of Africa. And we hope that we can get some support for this to do it once we get it done, and it's very close to being published. And we have a couple other story ideas that the same publisher is interested in. He's taken a real interest in this swimming issue. And he does some really fantastic books, but the idea is to develop some literature and to create the dialogue in the homes.
On the subject of diversity in swimming, want to remind you, I've written 2 books on popular music, and I'm going to take a term from popular music. I'm afraid I'm a one-hit wonder. I have no future projects on this particular subject, but I applaud those who do.
To anybody who has a question?
Has U.S. Swimming just,
I'm glad to, as a reading specialist, I'm glad to hear what you're doing. Has U.S. Swimming considered commissioning a book about Colin as one to put in the little libraries for the younger children?
That's a very good question.
Have we've reached out to athletes of color, Colin and others, but when it comes to commissioning a book, you also have to think about the cost of doing it. Would it be efficient to invest a lot of money in books, or would it be more efficient to invest money in programming for kids? I'm not avoiding your question, I'm just looking at the whole picture.
And there's a book written by one of our former national team members, Sabir Muhammad, that we have offered up some of our programs. So
If you want a copy, I have a couple in mind.
he put it together and published it, and we used it as some of our outreach activities.
One comment on the last question. Actually, USA Swimming did support our film early on, which is about Colin, and so there has been some interest.
That was a special case. We don't support every film out there. Just letting you know.
I'm not trying to. It's actually a big thank you to you guys for doing that. So we hope that the film will help to fill that void. But I have a question that combines the issue of educating and role models, which is coaches. We found during our filming that if there was anything rarer than a competitive black swimmer, it was a black swim coach. I mean, there's a real kind of a bottleneck or something going on there. I mean, there are coaches who are Latino. In fact, the swim team from Boston that we started following had a Hispanic swim coach. But I'm just curious if there, what thoughts of the people on the panel are about that.
I'll talk about that one, being a former coach. I think it's a numbers game. Bruce always talks about getting so many people into just the water and then into lessons and then swimming and maybe possibly swimming competitively. And then the next step would be becoming a coach. So, you build the base, the number of kids who are just in the sport and doing it, and I think it funnels out. I mean, you see that no matter what ethnicity you are, how many kids from your team as a youth are now coaching, it funnels through. How many kids are swimming past the age of 16, and that's any community. So I think it's just part of a numbers thing. Anybody else want to? No,
I think you said it all.
I just have one question, and that is that I know when different changes have been made in our history, that 2 things have always been fulfilled, and one would be a need for the change, which I think we've established. The other thing is accessibility. And in the years that I've worked with children, one of the things that have always stood in the way is that things were provided for children, however, the children never had access to it. Do you know what I'm saying? They couldn't go to the pool. They had no form of transportation. They couldn't participate for lots of different reasons, whether it was economical or social or whatever. So I think one of the variables that we really haven't touched is the variable of, yes, the need, but also the accessibility. Until we begin to work on that area of accessibility, I think we're going to be hamsters in a cage.
Access is a huge issue, but
but not as big as you might think. What I found out in 2008 and 2010, in the African American community specifically, it comes down to, in the community, it's a lot of single parent homes. And as a mom or a father, when they come home, they worked all day. They don't have time to bring the kid to the pool. So the kid suffers. The pool may be 4 blocks down the street. So access is, in some instances, isn't necessarily the issue. The most important issue is time.
I'd sort of like to piggyback on that, as I do think that that is part of the issue. I am actually a parent of a 9-year-old who's been competitively swimming since she was 4 and who learned to swim when she was 1. And am affiliated with Shawn and Manny through the diversity initiative at USA Swimming. And I work voluntarily with my local swim club in an effort to reach out to our local community. I think accessibility is an issue. I think one of the others, especially when you look from the competitive aspect, is affordability. It is a very expensive sport when you look at it from that venue. I think the other is value. I don't think that the value of swimming is totally understood when you compare it to other sports such as baseball, and basketball, and football, and some of the others in that respect. Based on my experience and our communication, my daughter is probably one out of 150 swimmers in our club, 5 African Americans, and 4 Hispanics. So it's very limited in that respect. And as I talk to people, the value of swimming just is not understood, the perception of it, the accessibility, the ease, if you will, of it. Kids can easily go in their backyard and play football or baseball or basketball. They can't go in their backyard and swim and that sort of thing. So I think the value is a huge piece of it. As an African American parent, if I see value in something, I will do whatever is necessary to get my daughter or my child involved in it. So I think that that's really a huge, huge part of it.
Retta's example, what she just discussed, reminded me of something I always say to parents who argue with me about swimming lessons. It's easy to go get a milk carton crate and put it up on a pole and get a basketball and cut the bottom, make sure you cut the bottom off for the basket. But when they say, I can do that, but I can't afford swim lessons, and then I look at their kids' feet and they have $150 shoes they're wearing, and then I say to them, okay, they can wear their shoes, but if they're walking by a pool, lake, or a river and they fall in, what are their shoes going to do? Are they going to help them swim? No. And so usually that's when they get the point.